Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well this evening. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. It's not very good light in here, unfortunately. Some changes. Canadian Foreign Policy Hour is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. I'm Yves Engler, coming to you from Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And there's a fair bit of stuff to deal with, and I only got 30 minutes because I have an event. I'm going to try to do this a mobilization meeting for the campaign, and then I have an event starting at 7 o'clock. I'm going to walk over to while doing the other thing, so I'm going to have to be quick and brief. First thing I wanted to mention was a advertisement for an upcoming talk I saw on who we choose to forget, the BIPOC fight for remembrance in honor of Remembrance Day. And Remembrance Day is, of course, coming up. And what has happened is increasingly we find that there's a collapsing of kind of anti-racist struggles into the militarist, imperialist nature of Remembrance Day. So we'll talk about Black Canadians who excelled in World War One or maybe helped the British and colonized part of Africa, and we'll celebrate their contribution to the British Empire, to the war machine, as part of a sort of anti-racist struggle. There's obviously, of course, Indigenous Remembrance Day that's on November 8th, which is also part of that kind of process, which has become, I think, ever more clear over the past maybe decade or so. A couple days ago in Toronto, there was the military did training around the city, Operation Steadfast Response. There was assault boats on the waterfront, army vehicles downtown, soldiers carrying weapons, but apparently with no ammunition. And this is apparently part of some sort of broader, according to CCPL story about it, it's part of a broader tie into NATO training. I don't know much more than that. In the Globe on Saturday, there's a piece. There's quite a bit of interesting stuff in it. In these, I think it was two different pieces in the Globe about the Canadian military. And one of the pieces is about the upcoming book that Stephen Seidman and I'm forgetting the name of the other guy, very establishment military foreign policy person at the Patterson School in Ottawa. They have an upcoming book, and apparently they look at the effectiveness of democratic control of the military in 15 different countries. Apparently, Germany and South Korea towards the top, and Canada's towards the bottom. And it's framed in that article. They quote Seidman or Seidemann, or how do you pronounce his name? Um, the civilians are looking at distancing us from the United States, and the military wants to keep their eyes closed, their ears shut, and hope that everything turns out okay. Basically, the point being that the Canadian military wants to keep close ties with the US military, even though the political directive or the broader political culture is saying something differently. And also that, of course, that the basically the government doesn't have proper control over the military. The military sort of does what it wants. And this is not new, but this book sounds from very establishment kind of figures. It sort of confirms some of what we knew. Another story that's quite interesting on in Saturday's Globe that about the military that I didn't know, which is these submarines. And I've there's been not much information about these submarines, uh, and they Canada's looking to buy submarines either from South Korea or from Germany. One report said it was going to cost 10 million bucks each. It was 120 billion dollars or 10 billion dollars each, 120 billion dollars. And they plan to buy a dozen. Now, what the story in the Globe show said is that Carney visited the shipyard in Germany. That's one of the possibles, and is either maybe today or tomorrow or right around now. He's going to be visiting the other shipyard in South Korea. And this is considered somewhat unprecedented, this level of depth of kind of engagement on it. Now, one of the things that's interesting in this, the quote, these are basically attack submarines. So Canada has had submarines in the past, but they were mostly defensive. They were basically used to practice and more defensive. These submarines they're purchasing have the ability to fire missiles, I think, from quite a distance. So that's interesting, and they quote somebody saying this is a real shift in the orientation of the Canadian Navy to be even more aggressive. Now, this goes alongside, of course, the surface combatants that are being built, which are expected to have the Tomahawk missile that can go 1,500 to 2,500 kilometers. So we're talking about a Navy that's very much oriented towards aggressive, even more aggressive warfare than in the past. Puglisi in the Citizen did a piece of a top DND official, Raquel Garbers, where she's complaining about Western leaders' quote absurd anti-United States narratives and that are helping Russia and China. So this is a top military official that's basically criticizing Western officials for being critical of Donald Trump, presumably because the Canadian military wants to deepen its ties to the US military and the US empire. On that note, the Globe also had a story about, also on Saturday, it was quite a good Saturday edition, rare, which is rare. But they quote they say that Marco Rubio. So Trump, of course, brought in these ended negotiations and this extra 10% tariff, supposedly in response to the advertisement that Ontario took out in some U.S. states, quoting Ronald Reagan and whatnot, and a big pushback from Trump. Now, the Globe says that part of this, the background to this, is that Marco Rubio complained to Trump that Carney said he would arrest Netanyahu if he came to Canada, and also they said that the White House was annoyed that Foreign Minister Anita Anand referred to China as a strategic partner, which is a shift in language, which Anita Anand did a couple days, 2 or 3, 4 days ago. So there seems to be a shift in language vis-a-vis China that is angering Washington, apparently. I'm forgetting his name. He's quite a interesting commentator on X, French guy, Arnaud. I forget him. He's in China. He lives in China. Uh, Pretty big following on X. He posted about this Rand paper, the very pro Pentagon, very close to the Pentagon paper. And the basic point is this paper and he's referenced this previously. He's saying that the U.S. deep state is shifting away from deterring China towards accepting coexistence. And this Rand paper lays that out. The Americans, despite all the brouhaha around China, have actually accepted that they can't win, which is interesting. I don't know enough to say with confidence either way, but if Rand is stating that, when of course Rand would be, its orientation would be more belligerence usually, I think that's quite revealing if that's what Rand's saying. And that might be influencing Canada's shift in tone on China. There's some other dynamics with China. I think that the change in public opinion, obviously the instability of Trump. There's some other dynamics that are go into Canadian policy shift. But that's a good thing. If there is a shift there, it's a good thing, in my opinion. Now, the Americans are clearly setting up like they're going to escalate with Venezuela, aircraft carrier, naval vessels in Trinidad and Tobago. Today, the Maduro government said they captured some CIA-backed operatives trying to create an incident to justify an invasion. All the signs are ramping up, right? This has now been going on for about 2 months. Got 10,000 U.S. troops there. You have about 10 different vessels that have been blown up by the Americans, and and Canada is probably supporting this in different ways through NORAD, maybe even a Canadian naval vessel. Uh, Now, what's remarkable about this is, and I wrote about this a couple of days ago, is just the silence from the NDP. No one in the leadership campaign, no one in the party has said anything about this 2 months now building attack. Now, this is in the context where Canada waged a remarkable, unprecedented 2 year campaign, open campaign to overthrow the government. And so Canada is, deeply tied into this Venezuela question. And the NDP itself, the former foreign affairs critic, she backed it. Hélène Lavadière, she backed Juan Guaido. Jagmeet Singh did too. It was a little bit wishy-washy. There was kind of bit playing out of both sides of his mouth. And there were some MPs that, months later started shifting outlook on Venezuela. But in the moment, in January 2019, they backed it. They backed it. And Canada still has all these sanctions, doesn't have diplomatic relations, a whole bunch of measures targeting Venezuela. And yet, no one in the NDP leadership race feels the need to criticize Trump. And I should also say this: the rhetoric of Trump's justification, the whole drugs rhetoric, which doesn't, it just collapses on any investigation of the situation in Venezuela. The whole drugs rhetoric, that was the same kind of rhetoric that Trump was using against Canada early on with the borders and fentanyl and this and the whole escalation of Canada. So, from a simple sort of like Canadian nationalist, mildly anti-imperialist kind of outlook, you should definitely be criticizing Trump. You can frame it as Trump. You can see it's not the US, it's just Trump and his, right-wing, whatever, fascist agenda in Venezuela. You use all kinds of ways of framing it to sort of give yourself a certain level of protection, but nothing, silence. Honestly, this is, if there's any argument for me as part of this NDP leadership race, or to become the leader, honestly, the Venezuela thing and this whole broader question is uh, right at the center. The NDP has been an imperialist policy, and I got reminded of that this week. First of all, this Venezuela stuff, but the other thing that I saw was that Owen Schock, who co-authored the book with me, Canada's Long Fight Against Democracy. He has a new book out on Canada Libya, and it's a history. Goes 2011 heavily, but it's a history. I read it a few months ago, and it's just come out. And he did an interview with Jeremy Appel. Good interview, and I think the title was Canada's Destruction of Libya or something like that. It was a good title of this interview. And it reminded me that like the NDP had 100 MPs. They all either voted for bombing Libya twice, or maybe some of them didn't abstain. That was Jack Layton, right? That was the great Jack Layton that we hear so much about, who backed the destruction of Libya. There's never been any attempt of like, questioning NDP MPs or holding any sort of accountability on this question of destruction of Libya. I once asked Nikki Ashton in 2017 during the race. I saw her at a social she was doing here in Montreal, and I asked her if she'd voted for the bombing of Libya, and she told me that she didn't remember if she stayed out of the house or voted for it. And so, this is the level of this was obviously a sort of political response, but it's a level of kind of inhumanity. You don't remember if you voted to destroy a country. And I supported Nikki Ashton in her campaign because she was better than the alternatives. But so that's the left end of the NDP tradition, and you can go into all kinds of other issues from bombing of Yugoslavia. Even Sven Robinson, the most left-wing foreign affairs critic in NDP history, he openly backed the bombing of Yugoslavia for over a month, and then he shifted later on. The Korean War, if you go back to the CCF, of course, NATO for a long time, and back again today. So the NDP has this long history. On the note of NATO or of the NDP, we did an action alert this week calling on the NDP to support the conclusion of this report by the Jewish Faculty Network that said basically, effectively didn't use this word, but effectively said that the CJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, which is the advocacy agent of the federations, the Jewish federations across the country, which have billions of dollars in assets and are tied into the World Zionist Organization, tied into United Israel Appeal, so whole top structure of Canadian Zionism. We called on the NDP to adhere to this report, and Avi Lewis, one of the leadership candidates, he was one of the co-authors of this Jewish Faculty Network report. And we called on him to all the leadership candidates to come out and say they'll boycott CJA as the report calls for. Now, Avi in the Toronto Star, what got me going on this was Tyler Leviathan, the former head of Independent Jewish Voices, who was basically complaining that Avi told the Toronto Star that it wasn't a blanket boycott of CJA. So he kind of backed away in an interview with the Toronto Star. He kind of backed away from the conclusion of the report, which is pretty close. It's not, it doesn't use the word blanket boycott, but it certainly strongly suggests that. And Tyler was complaining that Avi kind of backed away from these conclusions. And so that was one of the motivations in pushing this call for NDP candidates to boycott CJA, is to sort of use the opening of this race to push that. And one candidate did come out. Tony McQuail came out and said he'll boycott CJA. So that's good, but we need to keep pressing on that. And I think the leadership race offers some interesting opportunities to press on really making some big gains on anti-genocide, anti-apartheid kind of positions within the NDP. The Maple had a story this week titled "Canadian Forces Scheduled Missile Training in Israel Last Year." So they were getting trained on weapons that Canada was purchasing from Israeli company. The Globe had a piece, it was an Associated Press piece, that said that the AP saw Canadian soldiers when they visited the 200 or so US troops that have gone to Israel to sort of oversee this ceasefire or whatever, the Trump 20-point plan of some of which is good in the sense that you less killing directly and less starvation, and then it's all part of the control and domination of Palestinians. And so there's Canadian troops apparently that are part of this U.S. Deployment, according to this Globe story. That deserves more attention. I don't know more about it, but that deserves more attention. And it also speaks to the broader issue of Canadian troops is way more Canadian, direct Canadian military, not arms sales, not supporting Israeli military through charities or Canadians fighting. The Canadian military, I guarantee you, has been assisting the Israelis over the past 2 years, intelligence gathering, probably Canadians in the country in different ways. I almost, much more than we fully understand. And that certainly should be explored a lot more. Shane Martinez, a lawyer, had a post this week about how Canada's never called on Israel to comply with United Nations Security Council Resolution 1887 to abandon its illicit nuclear weapons program. I mean, I knew that at a general, but I didn't know the specifics of the resolution. And the Honest Report in Canada this week seems to have changed its charitable status. I believe that happened this week. I don't think I mentioned it last week. On their website, which looks like a small win, they seem to have kind of played a bit of a game, but I think it's because they're under pressure around their charitable status. So that's a good development. There was a protest in London where they seem to have blocked all the accesses to the big military trade show. And some local activists in London, and I think Rachel at World Beyond War were central players in that. Looks like a success. Bravo to them. Tamara Lawrence interrupted McGuinty the defense minister a talk on Friday at at the Empire Club in Toronto, where she challenged him on $150 billion to the war machine. So there is resistance to the genocide and Canadian militarism. There are signs of resistance playing out this week, and I guess I'll leave it at that. I was going to go into a bit more on some of the smears in the NDP stuff, but I think I'll just leave it there. So we have about 6 or 7 minutes for comments or questions if people have any, and you can go ahead quickly, Yuri,
Hey,
and I'll
Eve.
try to make
Hey,
Laura.
Eve. I hope all's going well with the campaign, and because time is very limited, gotta ask, who, uh, who, uh, who have you been surprised that hasn't come out to support your campaign or at least defend your right to free speech? I've been off social media for a long time because of illness, so I'm very curious your response to that. And I just want to say it hurts a lot to hear that Desmond Cole and blanking on her name, but an anti-Zionist Jewish feminist. I was very disappointed to hear that both of them were engaging in smears and hostility towards your campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I've been taken aback. It's a weird one, right? Because at one hand, there's been this remarkable level of support. I couldn't imagine how quickly we fundraised, over 85,000, how, fast that was, how we got the signatures, all the different things, how many volunteers, everything has been remarkable support. But there's also been a unhinged, I mean, there's no other word but that, uh, backlash from people who describe themselves as on the left. And it's just like kind of wild to see. Like when Desmond Cole and
And
Mark,
even people who call themselves the best friends of Palestine.
well, not just people calling best friends of Palestine, but people who call themselves like, socialists and anti-capitalists and, like, and I mean, Martin and Desmond did a 10-minute clip where they just went on about the non-existent, but in their head, existent financial irregularities. And they just did not mention the platform, like for 10 minutes. And they, basically just echoed the worst of the NDP brass's attack to the National Post. Like the National Post coverage is way more fair than the Breaches coverage. With the National Post at least quotes Elections Canada saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. They're allowed to do that. I mean, they bury it in National Post. They focus on the NDP's allegations against the campaign. So it's just stunning, but it's not just it's all over. I mean, there's been just round after round of smears, and there's been the anti-Semitism, the Rwandan genocide, the red brown. I mean, there's just some new kind of attack, and now they've decided all of a sudden there's this like they really care. They really, really care, really, really, really care about the rules of the NDP rules. Now we're following the NDP rules, but what now they're saying is they really, really care about the rules of a certain perspective of the NDP leadership. I mean, it's just embarrassing. Like even if everything they said was actually true, which is not, it's like categorically erroneous and a lie. Even if everything they said was true, it's kind of like who cares? I agree with the Elections Canada rule that there shouldn't be, it's a way of keeping rich people out of buying elections. You have a maximum of 1750 donation. That's a good rule. The other stuff is just like, it's kind of like bureaucratic, whatever, right? And like, so who really cares about that stuff? And so it's just, it's just embarrassing. I mean, I don't know what else to say. But it goes to, I just published a piece about the political economy of this question. The notion that it's like the funding of uh, the left, this sort of like anti-imperial, like everyone knows, and I detail this in extensively in the left right book, that there's no money in anti-imperialism. in the left, there's money in union jobs, there's money as an NDP staffer, there's money in NGOs, there's money in the environmental world, there's money in some anti-racist stuff. There's no money in anti-imperialism. So like they have the world flipped upside down. With focus on this financial side, they've just flipped the world upside down. And so like what's unique about this campaign is that we've actually been able to generate a bit of money in this world that's like completely financially marginalized. So it's just totally dirty. It flows from like, Martin's decade-long desire to ride the Avi Lewis train to be NDP leader, which I don't really understand. I don't understand why Avi Lewis has wanted to be NDP leader for more than a decade. That makes me that's if there's one argument against Avi Lewis as NDP leader, it's that Avi Lewis has been preparing to be NDP leader for more than a decade. You got to be very careful of people who that's their, like their aim. They want power. I mean, I only came into the game in June when it was brought to my attention. It wasn't on my radar. So that to me is I mean, there's a dynamic there. There's this broader dynamic. You're seeing that the people who are in the professional left, who are getting access to different grants, to union pork choppers, NDP staffers, sort of like people with some connection, the dominant media, they all have come out so aggressively. Clearly, I and this campaign are so threatening to them. It's just totally weird to see play out, but it's real. I mean, there's just an endless stream of smears and attacks. And when you stop and you go big picture, even if you agree with most of you, even if you say, oh well, Eve has been insensitive. Amidst this Holocaust in Gaza, Eve's been insensitive to Canadian Jewish feelings. Okay, fine, fine. Accuse me, whatever. Maybe I find me guilty for that. When you think about all this big picture, all of the allegations against me are so inconsequential next to the big picture of this like platform that's a big step forward of this campaign putting forward anti-imperialists, of this whole kind of like pushing the NDP race to the left. All these people who call themselves socialists and this and that, like big picture, even if they don't like don't you don't like, I don't know, Eve wrote something critical of me 7 years ago, like in case of Desmond Cole, where he did a thing with Warren Kinsella 7 years ago, and I wrote a piece about, oh, you don't, Martin doesn't like that, go on, right, you go on, but big picture, like come on, come on, this is clearly a positive advancement, and they're doing everything they can not just to crush it. They're doing everything they can to crush it. They want the NDP to crush this. They want the NDP to crush it. The NDP to step in, and they're freaking out that we're not following the NDP game. But it's actually worse than that. I made this point elsewhere. They want me jailed. I mean, they're running around saying I'm violating the law. They know that there's all these Zionists who are trying to get me jailed for this and that. They know there's like I have a legal thing in 2 weeks with or in a month with the police, and there's all these different Zionists. They want me jailed. I mean, I don't know what the other conclusion is. When you go around, oh, he's breaking the law. They're saying it repeatedly. He's breaking the law. They're going and they detail the alleged breaking the law. Now, Elections Canada, of course, hasn't come, so we know that it's ridiculous. But this is effectively what, in my opinion, it's not hyperbolic to say that. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
Okay,
I have to go in 1 minute.
Okay, Reagan, can you quickly say your question?
Yeah, I don't know if I had a question, but I worked with Avi and Martin for years, and I can confirm that they stop well short of where things need to go. And the question I've been asking, hoping to see in the NDP leadership campaign, is some mention of the Ogdensburg Treaty that Canada signed with the United States in 1940, subjugating Canada as a U.S. colony. In August 1940, U.S. put 100,000 troops on the border and invited our prime minister alone to come sign this treaty. And it explains an enormous amount about Canada's history and the NDP's history and what's going on today with Trump and 51st state, etc. And I'm a little bit mystified why Eves hasn't been interested in
Thanks
that
for bringing
history.
that, Greg. Unfortunately, we have to go now. It's at 6:30.
Okay,
And
go ahead.
sorry, but think about maybe next time.
Yeah,
I've
sure.
never heard of this myself, actually. Sorry about that, Reagan. Okay, I think we have to let Eve go to his meeting now. So thanks.
Yeah, we can continue that, Reagan. You can have some space next week to continue that if you want.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Take care, everyone.